Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Sometime fairly recently, I was reading an article about migratory birds. I've forgotten what kind of birds the article was about, but their migration patterns were the longest ever encountered, well over 5,000 miles. What made all this particularly interesting is that when it is time for them to leave their roost in South America and head back to North America, the route they follow takes them out over the ocean for several thousand miles. There are ways for them to pick up food along the way, but the real question is sleep. This part of the journey can take weeks, and again, there's no place for them to land for a nap or a night's rest. So how can these birds do this? It turns out that birds have an uncanny ability to turn off half of their brain while leaving the other half awake and active. So while one side of their brain is asleep, the other side is alert and active in keeping them flying. It's an amazing aspect of their creation. This week we are looking at birds and how they are mentioned in the Bible, and perhaps today it is a good time to start with what is probably the very first reference to birds in our scriptures, right there in the story of creation. In Genesis 1 we read, "And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth, across the expanse of the heavens." In fact, birds are mentioned several times in the creation story, but here is when they were created. And perhaps here they add to our sense of wonder in all that God created. Particularly the passage refers to birds flying across the expanse of heaven. I think watching a bird in flight like that fills us with wonder and awe. And I know I have felt that, especially in times when I'm up in the mountains or at some overlook way high up, and I can look across the expanse to see a bird serenely floating on the breeze. Even more, I know that I can't fly like birds can, and that helps me remember that God made everything different, and that intentionality by God to make everything and everyone different perhaps invites me into deeper patience and understanding for others who are different from me. Another interesting story about birds in the Bible comes from the book of Numbers. I'm sure you remember the Exodus and how Moses led the people out of slavery in Egypt. You probably also remember that the people grew hungry and God provided them manna to eat. Well, it probably doesn't surprise us that it wasn't long before the people grew weary and tired of this daily bread that God was providing. They complained about the manna to Moses, who took it to God, and in Numbers 11, we learn how God then provided quail for them to eat each evening. Then a wind from the Lord sprang up, and it brought quail from the sea and let them fall beside the camp, about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side, around the camp, and about 2 cubits above the ground. And the people rose all that day and all night and all the next day and gathered the quail. Those who gathered least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. And maybe what this story is about is how fickle and selfish we are. Maybe even more what this story is mostly about is God's unending patience and love for us, and that God cares for us. Our third passage about birds today comes from 1 Kings 17, and I need to give you a little background. This story is about Elijah, and he was struggling with King Ahab in Israel. Ahab was a wicked king, not following the way of God, and if you want more proof of the nasty guy he was, his wife was named Jezebel. Elijah told Ahab that it wouldn't rain in Israel until Ahab repented and changed his ways, and then Ahab vowed to kill Elijah. Ahab thought that if he killed Elijah, the curse would be broken. So Elijah fled at God's command. And we read, "Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah, 'Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there.'" So he did what the Lord had told him and went to the Kerith ravine east of the Jordan and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Now, I've got a bird feeder, and I've fed some seagulls by hand, but I don't remember a time when birds came to bring me food. So this story indicates that God caused the birds to behave in this way for God's purpose. And maybe one of the messages that we can get from this story is that if God can use birds for God's purpose, then surely God can use us. When we think we aren't worthy to do what God wants, or that we aren't qualified or able, maybe that's when we should think about these ravens. God empowered them to serve. And in the same way, God empowers us. It's time to say yes. Far too often we are asleep with both sides of our brains. Wake up and serve God. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.